In 1834, a cult follower turned up dead. He was poisoned, and the man who called himself the God of the Jews at the time was accused of that murder, that cult murder, and that man still walked free. A few hundred miles away, another cult was breeding its own members like livestock, keeping a ledger of which men were allowed to father children. And then that cult turned into a company that's still around today. These weren't fringe weirdos hiding in the woods. This was pretty mainstream 1800s America, a country that was founded just decades earlier by men who thought organized religion kept mankind in the shackles of superstition and ignorance. So, how did the most rational nation on earth in a single generation explode into doomsday prophets, free love communes, and a woman who even declared herself the second coming of Christ? I doubt it. Let's get into it. America was founded in 1776, officially, of course. 1776, by the way, every time I hear that, I think of that clip of Alex Jones saying, 1776 will commence again if you take our guns, talking to Pierce Morgan, which is true. Happy 250th birthday, America. I love America, still, in spite of everything that's happened. America was founded in what some call the Age of Reason. The founding fathers were deists. They believed a creator made the universe and then mostly stepped back, letting it run without miracles or meddling. Jefferson, in particular, was skeptical enough that his political enemies branded him a borderline atheist. To many of the founding fathers, miracles weren't even possible. That kind of thing, they believed, kept mankind in the shackles of superstition and ignorance. And the public masses, even though they were Christian, were standard Protestant, which is like probably a rational form of Christianity, I would say. Catholicism has a dogmatic rationalism through the magisterium and stuff, but I really don't know a lot about it in all honesty. In spite of that, the public masses at the time in America were Protestant Christian, with Congregationalists and Presbyterians up north and Anglicans down south and Baptists and Methodists spreading fast on the frontier. And most of them were one way or another shaped by Calvinist ideology. From my understanding, Calvinism is defined by predestination and divine sovereignty. So you have Catholics, Protestants, slightly more rational free choice on that, but then there's Calvinism, which is kind of the opposite of like a libertarian free will, I can do what I want. It's pretty confusing. To be very clear, the founding fathers did not dislike religion. They often saw religion as a great moral guideline for people to emulate, and the teachings would be good for people to have as a moral basis. The founders did believe that religion could play a positive role in shaping the population's moral conduct and ideas about justice, decency, duty, and responsibility. But there was no ascribed religion within America. In a letter to John Adams, Thomas Jefferson boiled Adams' entire lifetime of religious reading down to just 4 words: be just and good, and said that's where all this searching has to end. So pretty based, all right? No chuds in early America. I've actually been shrinking. This is a normal sized bottle. I'm just getting a lot smaller with my advanced age. America, still relatively new at the time. In the 1790s, there was quite a resurgence in religious behaviors and movements. The new evangelical movement pushed the idea that America must be established as a Christian nation through revelation. This directly contradicted the wants of the founders, the government, and most of the citizens at that time, but the country quickly became evangelicals versus everyone else, which is honestly pretty much what it is right now, to be honest, guys. Anyways, while most argued that moral reason would be the guiding post for people to do good, evangelicals disagreed. Evangelicals believed at the time that one could only do good through the work of God, revelation, and obedience to God. Then we get to Thomas Jefferson becoming president in 1800. After Jefferson became president, evangelical preachers urged that America was going to fall to atheism because he was such a neckbeard libtard. People began to be more confused and anxious. A new movement began, the Second Great Awakening. This Second Great Awakening was fueled by class conflict, an anxiety of being in a new country and not exactly having an established faith that everyone could just kind of agree on or die. Pretty unusual at the time in the world, in all honesty. You take that and you mix it with the cultural differences from all the immigrants from Europe, each with their very own distinct and unique culture. These people were largely not united, and they were just living together in the giant swaths of land in a newly formed country. It was kind of the Wild West before the Wild West. The buildup of evangelical interest finally culminated in the Cane Ridge incident on August 6, 1801 in Cane Ridge, Kentucky. An estimated 10 to 20,000 evangelicals, some accounts push it as high as 25,000, descended on essentially a festival of preachers. Scores of preachers preaching. People reported that there were violent outbursts of emotions from the crowd. People were seeking salvation. They came there for revelation. It was reported that these people shrieked, laughed, yelped incantations, barked, ran in circles, danced, all while saying they were feeling the power of the Lord coming deep inside of them. And out of the Cane Ridge incident came the largest swath in evangelicalism that has occurred so far. There was a renewed interest in what's called millennialism, that Christ would be returning soon. His second coming was imminent. Some would declare America as God's new Israel, that America had a special part to play in this new Christian era. With this evangelical explosion, there were 5 main religions that established themselves in America at this time. Millerism, Mormonism, the Shakers, the Mover, I made that one up, the Kingdom of Matthias, and the Oneida community. They were the most prominent cults to grow out of the Second Great Awakening in America as a result of all of this. Quick heads up, by the way, already did a really big video on the Mormons, and they didn't like it. A lot of them, at least. Many of them just thought that I was an ex-Mormon because I don't drink alcohol. And I guess because I look like I could do a backflip and dance really well. I don't really know, guys. I just think the history's crazy and worth talking about and really insane, just like pretty much every single other religion, right? But that one's more fun because it started so recently and we can really see everything that happened in the 1800s and how the convenience of continuing revelation can just erase insane illogical fallacies. It's really funny to me, dude. It's really funny. They're good people, though. They're good people, though. I've never met a mean Mormon. I'm just gonna be real with you. And especially after the discourse and fallout of that video, because I went in, dude. I talked about every single negative thing that I could possibly find. Also did a video about the Vatican last year as well. The Catholics didn't really care as much. They didn't really care too much. I guess because I didn't attack Jesus. I just kind of talked about the Vatican. I don't know. But Mormons claim they're Christian as well, and I didn't attack Jesus. So I'm not sure why they were so mad. I was attacking Joseph Smith. Anyways. I just drank coffee, by the way. And also, that's just not correct. I wasn't attacking Joseph Smith. I was just talking about Joseph Smith. And when you talk about Joseph Smith, it seems like you're attacking him. From a historical perspective, if you just like go through his life, it's like, wow, this guy was insane. He had some pretty good ideas, though. Never mind. So anyways, you can check that video out. We'll dust a little on Mormonism. All right, guys. But let's start with Millerism. One of the most prominent in the religious sects following the Second Great Awakening were the Millerists. Not to be confused with the beer that my dad likes to drink and what he calls himself when he's had too many. Millerism really kicked off in 1831 when a Baptist lay preacher named William Miller first started preaching it in public. Millerism was a millennialism religion that believed Christ's return would be mathematically proven. William Miller shared that he believed Christ would return sometime between 1843 and 1844. Quick summary of Daniel 8 is, Daniel sees a vision of a ram with 2 horns, one bigger than the other. This ram would be destroyed by a goat with 1 singular horn. When that goat's horn breaks, 4 horns grow from where the original was. The smallest horn grows the greatest and throws stars down, stopping daily sacrifice, destroying the sanctuary, and throwing truth across the land. And in the vision, a voice says it'll all be set right after 2,300 evenings and mornings. And then the angel Gabriel shows up to tell Daniel that this is a vision about the end of the world. That sounds like the 1800s! Now, the sanctuary that was destroyed, Miller believed, represented the destruction of Mother Earth. He said the 2300-day countdown started in 457 BC and would end on or right before 1843. And if you have a brain or a calc, you might realize that 2300 days divided by 365, that's how many days are in a year, Mr. Miller, you get just over 6 years. And if you subtract, or I guess add, 6 to 457 BC, you get 451 BC. So that seems to me to be off by about 2,294 years. So not really close at all, to be honest, but I could be misinterpreting it. At this point, I'm starting to think that Miller was a idiot, all right? let's just go home. But alas, Miller was not counting days. He was using a trick called the day-year principle. In Bible prophecy, one day stands in for one actual year. So 2,300 days becomes 2,300 years. If you start that at 457 BC, count forward 2,300 years, you land right around 1843 to 1844. So suddenly the math checks out. It's really convenient that you can take something like that and interpret it as something that relates more so to you, when at the time a lot of the stuff was written, that's what they were doing then. But 6 years after 451 is kind of irrelevant, so there was a second Great Awakening. And if you just so happen to be able to multiply days into years somehow, on Miller's terms, it checks out. All right, I'm back in. Sorry, I don't think you're a dumbass. I think you're a genius. Now let me kill you with my incel rage. Now, of course, Miller wasn't just making this up on the spot. He wasn't receiving any sort of divine revelation. He worked all this back out in September of 1822, almost a decade before he ever preached it in public. It was in his memoirs, 20-point document, and this exact claim was Article 15. He shared this with a few people, thinking that people would be very interested, only to find out people didn't care that much that he was predicting the end of the world. Nobody in his personal life or his friends anywhere seemed to care at all about him and his revelation. The ministers did not care at all, and he was pretty disappointed by the lack of attention. He would go on to say in his apology after the world didn't end in 1843, "To my astonishment, I found very few who listened with any interest. Occasionally, one would see the force of evidence, but the great majority passed it by as an idle tale." Because you made it all up. Anyways, after this, he would go on to publish his findings in the Vermont Telegraph, and it received a great deal of interest after he had published there, with dozens of people writing and wanting to know more. I want to know more about the end of the world. Wait, are you saying I'm special? Millerism officially formed in 1840. It's very interesting because this is 3 to 4 years before the end of the world, just enough time to get everyone really invested. A devoted follower named Joshua Himes, the promoter who'd turned Miller's math into a national movement, began publishing a paper called Signs of the Times. And Signs of the Times would put out the majority of the teachings that Miller wanted to pass on to his followers. Through this, these Millerite papers were published in numerous cities. It made it to New York City, Philadelphia, Rochester, Cleveland, and Montreal. There were at a certain point 48 periodicals leading up to one of the most significant parts of the Miller's religion, the Great Disappointment. I love that name so much. Miller never nailed down a single day himself in which the world would end. He gave a year-long window, conveniently, or a day long. And that vagueness is exactly what let his followers keep moving the goalposts when nothing happened. Kind of like the rapture idiots you see on TikTok. I can't believe that people fall. I mean, people falling, I guess I do believe that people fall for that. You fall for everything, guys. You fall for everything. I tell you what's something you should fall for. Buying some candy off my website, sour.gg, to support the channel. Yeah, we make our own candy. That's how I got this skinny little arm. We also have a collab of Echelon and Sour Boys, Twilight Fusion. It's vanilla, blackberry, and cherry. It's insanely good. In fact, I'm gonna go grab one right now. Mormon approved. Just kidding. It's made from green coffee beans. If it comes from beans, you can't do it. Sorry, guys. Available for a limited time at sour.gg. Oh yeah, that's gonna make me squirt. Caffeine, L-theanine, 67 milligrams. I'm a big proponent of L-theanine. All right, guys. And yes, I just coughed and just kept going. I don't give a fuck. I take about 600 milligrams of L-theanine every single day. It helps me sleep. It also helps me think and not be racked with constant, never-ending anxiety. So grab some Echelon Twilight Fusion and some candy while you're at it. We have really good stuff. We've got jalapeno lime. It's real orange covered in jalapeno and lime. Nobody's ever done that. I don't think, at least. We have. You can go get some right now at sour.gg. And for the lovers of our sour belts, I apologize that they're gone. We had to pull them temporarily to reformulate and improve our machinery. We've been doing this for probably the last 3 months or so. We already did this with the gummies. That's why we have all the cool new base flavors like orange. And we're working really hard to bring the belts back in a way that we can actually run our business with, because they are so expensive to make. We lose money with every single bag that we sell. And that is not a lie. That's not an exaggeration. I have a really good finance team that is like, hey, Caleb, you you've been doing this for 2.5 years. I think it's time to stop. And they keep telling me, and I'm just like, we can do it. I'm not a good business owner. You're supposed to make money. But we have a lot of really happy customers, and that's genuinely all that I care about. I'm just grateful to be able to do any of this stuff. So if you guys want to support the channel, you want to see more content like this, you can support by going to sour.gg and buying some candy, or hitting the like button, hitting the subscribe button. I don't know if those do anything at this point, but whatever, it helps, and I appreciate you guys massively. Thanks for my own brand for sponsoring this video. Miller never nailed down a single day himself. He gave a year-long window, or a Bible day, and that vagueness is exactly what let his followers keep moving the goalposts when nothing would ever eventually happen. People would ask over and over again, when did he think the world was gonna explode and end and everything was gonna die and we should all have sex with him and he should have as many wives as he wants? That wasn't him. I just slandered the poor man. One of the dates he gave was between March 21st, 1843 and March 21st, 1844. And when March 21st, 1844 passed without any incident, the Millerites actually stayed very faithful to Miller. Miller wrote to Himes, "The time as I have calculated it is now filled up, and I expect every moment to see the Savior descend from heaven." So, what's the great disappointment we mentioned earlier in Millerism? Well, there was a follower named Samuel S. Snow, SSS. Pretty cool name there. Former skeptic who'd become one of Miller's most aggressive idiots, a number cruncher for the Millerites. By 1843, 1844, the second coming obviously had not happened, so people were scrambling to recalculate. To pin down the exact date, Miller had always left a little bit fuzzy. The Millerites began leaning on the Karaite calendar, an older Jewish calendar system for dating the holy days, to argue that April 18th, 1844 was the real date. And this date, too, would pass without Christ coming. It was in August of 1844 that Snow claimed through his own reading of Daniel 8 and the Karaite calendar's Day of Atonement that Christ would return on the 10th day of the 7th month of the present year, 1844. And that came, and that went. The last date, October 22nd, supposed to happen. Guess what? Didn't happen. Jesus didn't come back. Maybe he did, but it was in Mexico, and it was just a guy named Jesus. The final date was the ultimate last straw, and that was the true great disappointment. The pretty much universal opinion was that everyone was surprised it didn't happen. Everyone was a true believer and believed that the world was going to explode, that Christ was going to come and everything was going to be fine. People had sold off all their possessions thinking that it was going to happen. A lot of Millerites actually faced violence in their local communities because they had been essentially promoting this to people for so long. They're like, hey man, you're gonna want to do this with me. We should rub our penises together because we won't be around long because Earth's gonna blow up and Jesus is gonna save us. So we should like really quickly dock for about 5 minutes. Just kidding. That's a weird sex thing I've never done before. But these people were promoting it, going, the world's gonna end, blah! And they sometimes were met with violence, which, in my opinion, kind of deserved. Just kidding. Violence is never the answer. Out of the great disappointment, there were 3 groups that formed, which you might have heard of before. 1, the Advent Christian Church. To be clear, by the way, Miller himself never joined any of these splinter groups. He died in 1849 before they really took shape, still insisting the date was just around the corner. A second wave of disappointment Millerites simply drifted into the Shakers, which was another cult that we'll be getting to very shortly, and the third group would eventually become the Seventh-day Adventist Church, which today is by far the biggest of the bunch with over 20 million members worldwide. I even knew quite a few of them growing up. Seventh-day Adventists, they didn't do anything. They just didn't watch Harry Potter. That was the only thing I remember growing up, them talking about the differences in Seventh-day Adventism. And they were like, yeah, we don't, we celebrate on Sunday. The Sabbath is on Saturday for us, and we don't watch Harry Potter. And as a young atheist neckbeard, I asked them, aren't you supposed to not eat meat and all kinds of bullshit too? And they were all morbidly obese and ate hamburgers and stuff. So a lot of inconsistencies in these little splinter groups of churches and other bullshit. As I mentioned, a lot of the Millerites would leave their cult to join another cult, one that technically predates the Second Great Awakening. Shakers originally started as a small Quaker split-off group. They earned their name from being the Shaking Quakers because they believed that during their revelation, they would not be receiving the word of God unless they were extremely animated, which is hilarious. The group actually started over in England. Bunch of dumbasses over there. Anne Lee joined in 1758, took the whole thing over, and then shipped the movement across the Atlantic, planting it just outside of Albany, New York in 1776. From these humble, shaken, and groovin' beginnings, they rose from 9 followers to over 6,000 by the 1840s. Now, they were another millennialism-centered cult. They believed that Christ's second coming was upon us. They were actually formally known as the United Society of Believers in Christ's Second Appearing. That is a really long, bad name. No wonder they only had 6,000 people. I understand why they went by the Shakers. It's a lot cooler. It's a lot cooler. Come on, shake with me. I know you're looking at your phone right now, you goober. Either that or you're in the living room watching on your TV with your entire family. Get shaking with me. Come on now. It actually makes me excited to know that I may have just caused possibly more than 6,000 people to shake from my one video. That's pretty epic. The Shakers had some pretty novel egalitarian ideals. They were pacifists. They didn't like fighting each other. They believed in true gender equality, communal living, and absolute celibacy. There was no allowed in the entire church. They didn't believe in marriage. They didn't believe in anything, not even procreation. They did, however, believe that they received messages directly from the Holy Spirit, and as I mentioned before, they danced, they were very animated. Their holy revelations received from the Holy Spirit would result in seizure-like convulsions while they were worshiping. They were the Shaking Quakers, and quickly became the leader of the small community. She would later be known as Mother Ann to her followers and claimed numerous revelations during her leadership, including the fall of Adam and Eve being related to their sex. She would call her followers to confess their sins, give up their worldly goods, and take up celibacy, forsake marriage, and that this would be part of their tradition. True renunciation of all lustful gratifications, which I'm right there with you. I'm kind of like a snail. Me and my wife, we've been celibate for a long time together. In 1774, they would begin their trek to America. This would be a trip of 9 people, including Anne and her husband. No! Pretty much as soon as they get there in 1776, Abraham Stanley, Anne's husband, abandoned her for a hotter, younger girl who actually wanted to have sex with him. He left and never came back. I made up all the other sex stuff. It's pretty easy to be considered a cult, by the way. I feel like most religions just in general are pretty much just cults. Some don't have that many negative consequences, so it's not that big of a deal. But others are, they're bad. It's just blindly following, pretty much. The charismatic leader, the personality, and so on and so forth. It's pretty interesting. Anyways, Anne and the rest of her cultists would end up in Watervliet, New York. One of her closest followers, James Whitaker, described a vision of America. He said,
"I saw a large tree, every leaf of which shone with such brightness as made it appear like a burning torch, representing the Church of Christ, which will yet be established in this land."
What about all the Protestants, bro? What about all those people? And the Catholics, man, and the Quakers and all that shit. Are Catholics Christian? I'm just kidding. Pope's spitting heat on AI. I'm gonna be real with y'all. Pope's dropping bombs on AI right now. It's pretty sick. It's pretty sick. Pretty well written. A manifesto? I think I might write a manifesto. Now, when they arrived there, obviously 1776 was a pretty tumultuous year for America. A lot of fighting and shit. Anne and her people refused to swear an oath of allegiance to the country that they had just immigrated to, and because of that, they were imprisoned for several months, which is good. They deserve that shit. But also, unfortunately, doing this raises a lot of sympathy, and that led to a spread of the Shakers religion. It was after this that Anne started to call herself Mother Ann and declared herself the second coming of Christ. She was the second coming of Christ, specifically the female half of God. The way they saw it, Jesus was the male side of a dual male-female God, and Anne Lee was the female side, finally showing up. No wonder her husband left her. For a much younger, beautiful woman. Now, apparently, this second Christ died pretty quickly after this. It's in 1784 when Anne would die, just 8 years of being Christ, and then she's gone. Taken from us. How did she die? She wasn't crucified like Christ or persecuted in the same sense. She was allegedly persecuted during her missions. She was beaten by violent mobs who were like,
"Quit dancing and shaking, you crazy shaking Quakers!"
It's pretty sad, but I feel like when you claim that you're the second coming of Christ and you just make shit up, you're kind of inviting some level of consequence, especially in the 1700s in England, I guess. After Mother Anne's death, James Whitaker took over and was then quickly replaced by Joseph Meekham. In 1787, receiving another gift of revelation, moving them from Watervliet to New Lebanon, New York. It took about 6 years to come about, but by 1793 in New Lebanon, the Shakers have a complete communal living space. They're engaging in religious communism. They're sharing everything. They have covenants where people confess their sins and consecrate their property, so everyone lives on consecrated land within the church. They live completely celibate lives. They're still doing that as a decree by Mother Ann Lee. By the way, no one's having kids. No one's married anymore. You're just blobs of people waiting for the second coming of Christ, which came and then died. And then nothing happened, except for you just didn't get to have sex anymore and your people were all gonna die out. By the way, if you joined the church, you had to dissolve your marriage. And if you refused to dissolve your marriage, you could only be a sympathizer within the church. So if you're into you can be a sympathizer, but if you're, weird, you can be a full shaker and mover. Other than the strange sexual stuff, like not being allowed to have sex, there was more freedom given to women in the church. They do not have to care for their own children. There's communal care. It takes a village, kind of Hillary Clinton style. Everyone is doing everything that they can to help one another in the Shaker community. Remember at the beginning of the video when I promised you a sex cult run by women? I lied. It's a no-sex cult run by a woman. This is one of the more bizarre sex cults because it's led by a woman, but it's not that you have to have sex with the leader. It's that no one is allowed to have sex at all. I think people need to really acknowledge the fact that there's no sex at all for this cult. It's really weird for the cult. Normally it's like, I get to have 100 wives and I get to do whatever I want and I get to get a lot of money and I'm like Scrooge McDuck and I get to swim in it and I get like 100 wives and I get to come on or whatever. That was my impression of Joseph Smith. Let's move to Utah. let's stop in Missouri. Oh God. That's funny. I read a lot of the Book of Mormon. They actually sent me the Book of Mormon. Here, let me grab it. Jesus Christ did not show himself unto the people of Nephi as the multitude were gathered together in the land bountiful, and did minister unto them, and on this wise did he show himself unto them. I'm just kidding. It's disrespectful. I'm sorry. It's a joke. They did give me the Book of Mormon, and it was actually sent by a real Mormon who left me a note and all kinds of really extremely nice stuff. I know they're like forced to be nice and it's like a joke, just like they have to do backflips and stuff. But I was very grateful that so many Mormons reached out and instead of just arguing or whatever with me and trying to debunk what I said, they just suggested I read the book. I did. I read a good bit of it, but I didn't read the entire thing. It really drags on. I'm going to be honest with you guys. And there's some pretty wild stuff. But alas, if it helps you and you don't hurt others, it's kind of what really matters in the end, I think. Still probably a cult, though, to be honest. After Meekham died, you'll never guess, the third coming of Christ! No, I'm just kidding. Nobody else came. The leadership was just passed on to another woman, Lucy Wright, and Wright had one more interesting approach to add to the Shakers. That was, go west! Very original. Genius. There's a bunch of faithless out there, and we've got to spread our communal religion where you can't get married out there in the West out there. She introduced hymns and dances. Things like the Hootenanny. Yes, the dance from Fortnite. And hymns like this. I just received the Holy Spirit. The goal for the Shakers was to grow and spread continually, like every religion and cult pretty much. During Lucy's tenure, the Shakers would grow to their peak size, and they would spread as far west as Indiana. They're still celibate. In fact, during the Civil War, Shaker communities were considered safe for both sides, both the Union and the Confederacy, because they were pacifists. And additionally, Lincoln would even recognize them as conscientious objectors among the very first the country officially let off the hook from military service, which is pretty cool. That's pretty cool American history if you ask me right there, bud. Come on! The Shakers ended up lasting a very long time, some of the longest of these cults, but they start to dwindle, and they start to dwindle pretty fast. Can you guess why and how? About to fact that no one was allowed to have sex. They weren't allowed to have kids. So they couldn't just make more Shakers that you can just indoctrinate. You gotta win cognitively with adults. It's way easier to just have a kid and say, this is what you believe, dipshit. Now, whatever else and stuff. I've had a coffee, a Twilight Fusion energy drink, and now a Dr. Pepper all in one recording. I'm going to die. Now, the Shakers would, of course, try to recruit children. They would go to orphanages and adopt kids, which seems like it should be a crime. By the mid-1900s, religious groups couldn't just adopt children anymore, and they put a stop to that. You had to be adopted by parents, so they didn't really have any other way to grow, and they started to die off pretty quickly, and they survived through recruitment, and as of 2025, there are 3 Shakers left, which is probably 3 people who ironically are like, yeah, pretty funny, isn't it? It's my religion, you know? I'm just kidding. We got Scientologists. There's people who actually believe in Scientology. I get using it as a tool set. I get using any religion as a tool set to be a better person and grow and experience more in your life and sort of open your mind up to more stimulus. I get that. It's kind of where I'm at, guys. It's kind of where I'm at spiritually. You know, it's a little funny. The whole dancing thing and no kids and stuff, it's just, it's a terrible business model for a cult. Now, the Shakers aren't the only cult to still exist today. There's the Oneida cult. You may have heard of it. You may have not. If the Shakers were a cult that basically died out because nobody was allowed to shoot seed and have sex, Oneida ran the exact opposite experiment. It was a cult built around everybody just launching seed, catapult, having sex with everybody. 2 utopias, 2 opposite rules about sex, and both of them collapsed eventually, but still exist in some form or another. Oneida cult was formed in Oneida, New York, in what people called the Burned Over District. It was a stretch of upstate New York where so many cults and revival preachers clustered that the place was said to be scorched by the flames of Christ. And the land there was actually bought back in 1842 by a man named Jonathan Burt for a small Christian perfectionist group. The belief is that you can live without sin on earth. You don't have to wait for heaven. It's like the whole thing of Christianity is that heaven is sinless, and your time on earth is just spent sinning and trying to repent for it and so on. But with Christian perfectionism, you can achieve it by living a life that's in perfect harmony. You can achieve perfectionism. It's through this that we get to the man who formally established the Oneida cult, followed by the name of John Humphrey Noyes. Now, the Oneida Church never got as large as the Shakers. Their largest recorded number was just 306, tiny next to the big-time success of the Shakers. There's 6,000. That's because they confined themselves largely to just Oneida, New York. And this little group left a pretty big mark that you'll probably see if you go to your own kitchen drawer. It's really weird, but it's gonna tie in, I promise. Now, the Oneida cult was also a millennialism cult with a bit of a twist. The twist of this cult was that Christ had already come. He had already come back in 70 AD, which was the year that Rome leveled the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. And guess what? Nobody even noticed, guys. He's already been here. So he died, he came back, and then he went away, and then he came back another time already in 70 AD. Now, everyone needs to try and live as perfectly as they possibly can so that the door to heaven would be open and they could go to it, to heaven. Sort of like going to Lowe's. I love Lowe's. I'm more of a Lowe's guy than a Home Depot guy. I used to be a Home Depot guy because they had Milwaukee stuff, but then I stopped enjoying the taste of penis. I'm just kidding, guys. I have a lot of Milwaukee stuff still. Fellas out there, guys out there, but my dad stole it all, so I'm a Makita boy now. That's right. Feel free to make fun of me. Feel free to make fun of me in the comment section below. I have Makita stuff. I haven't been working out too much, but look at my arm, my left arm. The right one's not doing so good, but the left one looks pretty good. No, it doesn't. I look like an idiot. I look like I have Makita tools and I shop at Lowe's. Let's be real. One of the things that Oneida was actually most known for was their concept of complex marriage, or a term a lot of people would come to use, free love. It's funny enough that Noyes is credited with creating the term free love, which, as far as I knew, was defined by the 60s and defined the 60s. At least I learned that from Austin Powers. Under free love, any member was free to have sex with any other member who consented. Hey, you wanna have sex? Yes, I wanna have sex. Let's have sex. I thought that's just how it normally worked, just in general, as being like a human type stuff. But here's where it really differs, is that the community, the Oneida community, frowned upon possessiveness and exclusive relationships. Everyone lived as one group family. Everyone could engage in consensual sexual acts with anyone that they wanted to, and everyone could be polyamorous, especially the leader. The reason that Noyes joined up with Bert and Oneida in the first place is that he had actually been charged with adultery. He was polyamorous, which obviously wasn't a recognized thing at the time, so he fled those charges to go meet up with Bert. And like every great cult leader, fleeing charges becomes a pattern when you learn more and more and more, especially with Noyes. So remember it, all right? His son, Pierpoint Noyes, grew up inside the community and later wrote a memoir about it called My Father's House, and the community's own records lay out just how complex these arrangements got. They had a system they called ascending fellowship, in which older, more spiritually advanced members were paired with younger initiates. And in practice, that means older women sexually mentoring young men. Young men, by the way, some of them are teenagers, and older men are doing the same thing with young women, teenagers, by the way. So it's pretty disgusting. And we would consider that today statutory rape. Oneida, the statutory rape cult. What is incredibly uncomfortable, though, is that in the 1840s in New York, the age of consent was 10 years old. So as horrifying as that is, under the law at the time, it wasn't technically a crime. The polyamory was, adulterous, but 10 years old age of consent is insane. Anyways, similar to the Shakers, they were communists, but the main way that they differed was the sex and having lots and lots of it. There was group marriage with Oneida, but there was a sort of unique caveat to their prolific sex. They engaged in something called male sexual continence. Continence is the act of having sex without reaching climax for the males. The ladies could. The guys, they could not. There was no climax ever, and this came mainly from Noyes' belief that sex for gratification didn't actually show love. He also believed that ejaculation drained vitality and led to disease. This guy would fit right in on Reddit. Holy shit. So that's very strange, but that is exactly why it mattered. If men only finished when the community allowed it, Noyes could control exactly who had babies with whom, which tied directly into something else that they did. They had a eugenics program. They literally coined a word for it called strip culture, a funny word for eugenics. It was bad? Maybe, right? Some people will argue that eugenics is always going to be inherently bad, and I would probably be one of those people. The Oneida folk seemed to work to try and cultivate the healthiest children that they could from their complex marriages, from their free love. They were trying to make a stronger gene pool because everyone could have consensual sex with everyone. They were really just trying to make it healthy stock to keep the community going, which is eugenics. Controlling that is, but it's like, not let's get rid of this specific group of people, but I don't know, it was on a small scale. It was only 300 people really, so I guess just having sexual preferences could be considered eugenics if this is. Just kidding. That's really stupid what I just said. I'd like to just tell Tara to cut it out, but I've got a pretty big ball sack I'm sitting on right now, and I don't really care. With all this being said, it kind of seems like maybe women are just the subject, like the lowest rung in the ladder, but in the Oneida cult, they were actually equal to each other, men and women. They could turn away sex from other men, they could wear whatever they wanted to, they could keep their hair short, they could do any jobs, they didn't have to take care of their own children, and they were free to live equal lives to men in this community. And they could also come. Seems bad and it's a cult and it's creepy, but it's not the worst we've ever seen for sure. That's a good way to put it. Now, Noyes tried to pass leadership to his son, Theodore, in 1879, and it did not go well at all. Theodore was an agnostic, and he didn't really want to be a cult leader, and he wasn't really well liked either, and you kind of have to be well liked to be a cult leader. And when he tried to step down, a few of the people would try and wrest control for themselves. One of these was James W. Towner. Towner would eventually lead a breakaway splinter group all the way out to California, and this part is real. He helped organize the creation of Orange County and became its very first Superior Court judge. A faction of a free love sex cult literally helped found Orange County, California, which is crazy because that's a pretty important county in California. The remaining members began debating whether or not children should be initiated into the free love, and then who would take on that burden of bringing the children into their free love. They kind of questioned sex in the cult altogether at this point. The founding members who supported free love were aging and dying, and younger members kind of wanted to just return to exclusive normal marriages. Like, non-cults, I guess. Anyways, remember how Noyes fled to Oneida to get away from some charges? Well, guess what he did again, guys? Noyes had an arrest warrant for statutory rape in 1879 and fled, moving to Canada. And while there, they recommended they abandon their complex marriages and people just sort of return to normal marriages. Soon after, the community broke apart and reorganized as a joint stock company called Oneida Community Limited. And that company became a silverware giant, Oneida Flatware, that odds are somebody in your family has eaten off of at some point, maybe even you at Thanksgiving. The brand's still on shelves today, though the original company was finally bought up by a bigger corporation back in 2021. Now on to the Kingdom of Matthias, probably the most wild cult in the 1800s, especially coming from a mental health perspective, if you view the whole thing as that. The Kingdom Matthias cult was founded by Robert Matthews with no real official date, just starting when he began to receive religious revelations in the late 1820s through the 1830s. There's a lot of conjecture and weirdness in Matthias' life, and eventually he would declare himself God of the Jews amongst a half dozen other titles, one being Thane of Whiterun, and other names like Robert Matthias, Jesus Matthias, Matthias the Prophet Matthias, Joshua the Jewish Minister is another one, which is pretty epic. And when his story would eventually make it to newspapers, he would also be called Matthias The Impostor, which is funny because it's not Matthias, and he's also being called an imposter. He was born in 1788 in Cambridge, New York, and by 1795, at age 7, both of his parents died tragically. Leaves him with his 4 brothers and 5 sisters being raised essentially by family and neighbors. He was raised a staunch Calvinist, specifically anti-burger Presbyterian, which is a strict Scottish offshoot, and around the age of 18, he takes up carpentry, like Jesus, and moves a few years later to Manhattan. Around this age, he had his first run-in with the law. There were accusations of assault and battery on a female, and he fled back to Cambridge to start up a successful carpentry business. Matthews made occasional visits to New York City, and he met Margaret, who he married in 1813. His business goes bankrupt in 1816, not so successful anymore, is it, Mr. Matthews? And he decided to take his family back to Manhattan, where he'd had such success before. He would eventually recoup his losses, but 2 of his children would die, and within a couple years, he would be bankrupt once again. Now, it's also observed that during his entire marriage to Margaret, he beat her with a whip. He was resentful that people, especially women, stopped obeying men, and he was taught that they also should have been raised as Calvinists. I don't think Calvinists just think women should be beaten, to be honest, but there's extreme dogmatic belief around Calvinism. The God of the Jews also resented the wealth that men around him had compared to his own impoverished state as a result of going bankrupt twice. At this point, Matthews reinvents himself. He starts growing out a large beard and calling himself Prophet Matthias, taking on the name from the apostle that would replace Judas, and abandons Margaret to preach his new religion. Really, it's just a cult that will restore fatherly authority in the home. His goal is to bring back the father, make the father the most important part of the family because he is a father. He's biased. Can't you see? By the way, not trying to throw a ton of shade at Calvinism. It's like a theological sect that attributed. John Calvin was the main guy, and he had a lot of social views that were very conservative at the time. A lot of Christianity went through a Reformation and became a lot more progressive at a certain point. So just because he was heavily Calvinist doesn't mean that his interpretation of what Calvinism was is actually accurate, nor does it mean mine. I don't really know a lot about it. There's a Christian patriarchy movement, and I believe he may have been a part of that. I really don't know, guys. From what I understand, a lot of Calvinism is equal in essence for male and female, but difference in roles, which you've probably heard before in just kind of a Christian traditional sort of viewpoint. So it doesn't mean beat your wife. Let us now introduce Elijah Pearson, a successful businessman and preacher who became entwined with Matthews, who is now going by Matthias. Elijah also grew up in a strict Calvinist community. He feared God so much that when he moved to New York City in search of work and becomes a successful merchant, he does not find any passion in it. He can't really fit into the new urban life, the progressive liberalism of New York. He joined an evangelical church, did some work, but things start to happen to him that cause him to break down. He would go on to marry a fellow evangelist, Sarah Stanford, and following Sarah, he completely devotes himself to religion and he strives to be morally as perfect as he can. He lives simply, well below his means, praying and running an asylum to reform sex workers, but Unfortunately, Sarah would fall ill and die. Their extreme fasting almost certainly did not help. It became inconsolable and also kind of goes off on the deep end, already an extremist in a sense. And he's starting to go through things that Matthias is currently going through as well. He changed his name to Elijah the Tishbite. He started believing that he would be able to raise Sarah from the dead. This is when Matthias and Pearson collide. Matthias is wandering New York, preaching his new religion, and he happens to knock on Pearson's door. He somehow convinces Pearson to hand over control of his life and to become a disciple within his religion. He also convinces Pearson's black servant Isabella van Wagenen to join up with their religion as well. We need to keep her in mind because she matters a lot in the end. He also recruits a few other wealthy investors into his religion. He recruits the wealthy businessman Sylvester Mills and an affluent couple named Ben and Ann Folger. That's right, the coffee brand. Not really, we looked it up. They're not related at all. It'd be funny though if they were. Matthias ultimately believed through more revelation that he will be the father of a holy child and that Anne is going to be the mother. Anne, being a new convert to his very small cult, leaves her husband Ben and ends up Matthias to try and conceive his child. Ben obviously is upset by this, and then he is sent on a trip to go bring Matthias' family back to him. Now, heads up. There are about to be two Isabellas in this story, and you need to keep them straight. There's Isabella the servant, Pearson's housekeeper, the one I told you that matters at the end, and there's Isabella the daughter, Matthias' own 20-year-old. This is complicated, but you're gonna have to keep up. Tara's helping with a family tree. I really appreciate that, Tara. On the trip, Ben ends up seducing Isabella the daughter, not the servant, and at this point, everyone is just kind of everyone, and it's crazy. Eventually, Matthias' daughter Isabella's husband comes back and demands her back. This is already after Matthias has beaten her because she didn't listen to her dad to start the guy who he is cuckolding, but he did give her permission, so then to make it all right, he makes her get married to him. Except that's not legal because she is still married to someone else. That's what's happening, so then she gets sent back off to her husband. She's gone. Now there's only one Isabella in the story again, and he gets married to the woman, Catherine Galloway. Ben still wants Anne back though. He does not like being married to Catherine. He wants to be married to his first wife. Anne occasionally has sex with Ben purely out of pity. Throwing a dog a bone, we call it. He doesn't want Matthias to keep having sex with his original wife, so he decides to open up to his peers, his old friends from the evangelical movement he was in before that, and tell them what's going on. He says, I don't like this King of the Jews guy having sex with my wife. They're understandably very upset by all the bizarre sex things in the small cult that's opened up in the house, and they expel Matthias from the home. He's sent away. He is not in the house. And that's the end of it, right? Wrong! While Matthias is gone, Pearson now thinks it's time for him to wrest control of the cult away. He should be leading the cult, and now he is trying to have sex with Anne, claiming it would relieve his pain. Oh, it would relieve my pain if I could do that. But it is at this time that Anne Folger says Matthias has murdered Pearson. Pearson would die in a very strange way, found in a pool of vomit on his shirt. Anne says that she ate a poisoned berry, not enough to kill or hurt her in any substantial way, but that Matthias has fed this to Pearson and that Pearson had died due to the poison. And now that Pearson's dead, Ben has this great idea. He's going to accuse Matthias of fraud and murder based on what Anne has told him. But Anne is pregnant with the Holy Child, Matthias' child, the one he was trying to conceive of, the one where she's called herself mother and he's father. She was second in command in the cult, but she's left Matthias behind and is now with Ben again. Ben puts out a statement claiming that him and Anne were victims corrupted by Matthias and that Pearson's servant was actually second in command of the cult, Isabella van Wagenen. Now, obviously, van Wagenen is pretty pissed off about this, so she decides to sue Ben and Anne for defamation and slander, and she claims that this is just a lie to cover up how far in the cult that they were, especially now that Matthias is on trial for murder. So Matthias, on trial, is really being raked through the coals by the press, being called Matthias the Impostor, and delivered a very damning testimony saying that Matthias fed Pearson the poison berries and that he was murdered. Ultimately, there's no evidence to suggest that he actually did this beyond her testimony, but then the jury rules that Matthias is not guilty of murder, but he is guilty for beating his daughter after she left her original husband to be with Ben. So he got 4 months in prison for that, but not for killing Pearson, which to this day is still unconfirmed. Matthias ends up being released from prison and continues wandering and preaching his delusions to people without ever really amassing a following ever again. Remember Sylvester Mills, this guy from the beginning of the cult, one of the most devoted followers of the King of the Jews? He ended up in an insane asylum with Ben and Anne trying to continue their lives in their evangelical community, but Van Wagenen doesn't like any of this, so she collaborates with an anti-racist newspaper to reveal the truth. She openly airs out the sexual promiscuity that was going on in the cult, how Ben was Matthias' daughter, how he was Catherine, and how Anne's child isn't Ben's, it's actually Matthias, and how they were pretty high ranking in the cult and how they were trying to hide all of that. And Van Wagenen wins the lawsuit against the Folgers, and then she walks out of this whole sordid mess and becomes Sojourner Truth. That's right, the cult's servant, the one who blew this entire thing open in court, went on to become one of the most famous abolitionists and women's rights speakers in American history. That's Sojourner Truth. That's crazy. So here she is with Abraham Lincoln, who's come up way more than I thought he would in this entire thing. So anyways, the Second Great Awakening definitely opened the door to some very strange sects of Christianity that opened up, two of which still exist today. One is a Silverware company and the other kind of is Seventh-day Adventist. But we all know that America is not immune to having cults within, our beautiful country. There's plenty of cults that are still in power in some form or another. Scientology is one of the most successful cults to spring up within modern America. There's also more recent cults that have garnered a lot of attention and, success in whatever form a cult can gather success. That's NXIVM. It was a self-help community that turned out to be a cult where women were branded and blackmailed into a secret sorority. And of course, we can't ignore the offshoot of the Mormon Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or FLDS. That's a genuine cult outside of Mormons. We've already talked about Mormons on the channel before, but the FLDS probably deserves their own specific video in the future. They were, if you didn't know, a Mormon offshoot that was led by Warren Jeffs, a man obsessed with returning to the polygamous roots of early Mormonism, including marrying off underage girls. Jeffs, still alive, is sitting in prison right now serving life plus 20 years, and not for the marriages. He was convicted in Texas of sexually assaulting a 12-year-old and a 15-year-old with his own audio recordings used as evidence. There were a lot of horrific things going on in the FLDS. But aside from that, Scientology and NXIVM are two of the more interesting in that they have both successfully infiltrated Hollywood, with L. Ron Hubbard, the sci-fi writer who founded Scientology, getting away with being a literal con man for years, though, with a French court eventually convicting him of fraud and absentia, meaning he was tried and found guilty and just refused to even show up, and he was sentenced to 4 years. He didn't serve a single day of it, spending his final years hiding and dying on a ranch in 1986. Meanwhile, Keith Raniere, the guy who started NXIVM, is serving 120 years in prison. 1800s America was not that unique for having a crazy wave of cults. We're the land of cults, it seems like. With certain freedoms comes cults, it seems. What's really crazy about all this is how much these tiny little doomed from day one groups still can kind of affect your life today, from people you grew up with, being Seventh-day Adventists, to potentially silverware in your kitchen drawer, or, a whole county in California, or state. It's crazy. A lot of it started and came out of these 1800s cults. You can always dig more into the strange ones, but we have the kooky communists and lots of sex and Lincoln everywhere. Anyways, thank you guys for watching this video. If you enjoyed, press the like button, and I will see you in the next one.